How's it going, YouTube? Coming to you today with another video, and today, guys, the review is going to be how to choose the deck for the format that you want to be playing. And this is really interesting because there's a lot of different things to consider, especially when it comes to the different kinds of decks that there are. So definitely go ahead and check out all my different sponsors over on Gem, Dragonshield, Imperium, Cloud, Grimoire, and ChainLink, all down below in the description. I appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of the channel, and thank all of you for being here for 20,000 on our way to 30. It's gonna be very, very cool when we hit that too. So exciting. And I really just want to hop into this video though, because there's a lot that I want to talk about when it comes to choosing the deck for you. The first thing I want to talk about is going to be the different kinds of decks that we have available to us. So the first one's going to be Control. Now, Control is a deck that has to sit on some form of a point of contention, right? So it's going to be like a Floodgate, or you're going to have like Dragoon with Spellcasters, what have you. There's going to be some board state that you can put up that's really going to be able to slow down the tempo of the game. And that's something that I really like to use as a word for Control: tempo. Tempo is very important because whenever you're trying to play a deck like Control, you really have to be able to slow the game down to your own pace, because you can't put up lethal very quickly. And that's one thing that's a huge downside, but an upside is the fact that you can play a lot of very powerful floodgates, like There Can Be Only One. You can play cards like Shifter, usually, some can't, but most can. Goes in match, just the cards that are really hard to out, and you have a really good opportunity to just go ahead and steal games. And I think that's really important too when it comes to understanding what Control can do. But you also have to understand that Control faces a lot of problems. Usually in people's sideboards, you're seeing a lot of Lightning Storms, a lot of Dusters, Evenlies. So if you don't draw like some way to a negation, like a Judgment, you could be in trouble. And that's one thing that is really unfortunate, but Control is usually not one of the better decks in a format. Lately, we've had Labyrinth, but even that with the full furniture build feels a lot more mid-range, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So Control is never one of the better decks, but it's still around and something that you have to think about. Talking more so about combo, though, the word that I compare combo to is fishbowl. So usually what is more deemed to a combo deck for me is whenever you have a hand with multiple lines. Usually it's not super linear, and there's a lot of different ways that your board can be put up, a lot of different ways that you can end your board, especially based on which matchup you're playing. Like you can go for like a negate plus dweller board, you can just go for a really mid board and be able to play on your opponent's turn potentially. You can put up like mass negation and just put up like the massive board. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about playing combo. Usually, Control is very laid back, combo is very aggressive. Combo doesn't really play a lot of non-engine, they play a lot of engine pieces to be able to push through a lot of pieces of interruption. And that's really important to know too, is because you might see like some droplets or some Fenrirs, but at the end of the day, there's not playing a lot of actual hand traps to make sure that the board's being prevented. So this puts combo at a loss sometimes, because if you look at decks like Vanadium or decks like Infernoble, they can have a really hard time going second, but once they go first, especially if uninterrupted, you're probably just winning that game on the spot. So really interesting to look at this from a different angle. Combo, again, being very aggressive, being able to put up pretty crazy boards. Control, not super crazy boards, but definitely still living under some crazy floodgates. But my favorite kind of a deck is going to be mid-range. So mid-range is going to be your Branded Chimera, your Sky Striker, your Marincess. These are going to be the decks that would be under the word linear. So there's not a crazy line that you're always going for, a big board or even like a small board. Usually it's just a very simple board, and it's the same board every time. What's cool about these decks is the amount of consistency that brings. Because if you're putting up the same board every time, that means you have a lot of ways to your starter typically, and that you're always able to do the same thing over and over. The other thing is that you're playing a lot of hand traps and non-engine, so it doesn't really matter if you go first or second. Obviously, some decks you really don't want to go second against, but at the same time, when you're playing so many hand traps, you're in a really good position when you are going second to go ahead and just end the turn. Because mid-range decks just kind of change their non-engine per format, and that really puts up a lot of longevity for these decks too, which is really cool. And I really like Branded Chimera. Personally, I think the deck's really solid. It's one of those things where, like, you can put up a very nice board with a hand rip, and you can play back a bit, or you can go very aggro and throw down like Guardian Chimera, go into a Magnum. And that's what's really cool too, because whenever you're playing a mid-range deck, it's really nice to just know that you can play really aggressive or you can play very back. You don't really need to stick to one thing. More importantly than talking about the different kinds of decks in the game at the moment, let's talk about the amount of hand traps that each deck can play. So if you play a control deck, usually you only see like 3 hand traps in the deck. Usually it's like just Ash Blossom. If you play combo, usually it's 6 to 8. You see like 3 Ash, 3 Imperm, and then maybe like 2 Veiler or 2 Droll as like the other 2 slot. Sometimes you can see a little bit more, but sometimes you can see a little bit less. Combo is definitely interesting, but usually it's like 6 to 8 hand traps you'll see. Mid-range can be anywhere from like 10 to 15 hand traps, and that's pretty crazy. There's a lot that you can play. And some formats, hand traps are a little weaker, but you can still play a lot of non-engine. In a deck like Branded Chimera, we can main deck cards like Super Poly. You have a really good advantage into multiple matchups. So your playstyle is going to be really important when it comes to choosing a deck. And this is something that I was told a long time ago, is that your playstyle isn't really that important when it comes to picking a deck. And I kind of agree. And it's because we all have this mentality that we're like, well, I want to get better, but I'm only a control player, right? You're not allowing yourself to just understand that the better deck in the room is potentially the deck that you just should be playing. And it's not that you can't play combo, because anyone can play any of the decks as long as you have enough practice and you sit down and you play enough reps with the deck, right? And I think that's one thing that you really kind of have to look at what you're playing and understand that you have other options. You're not just locked into being a control player, mid-range player, or combo player. You can play any of the decks, but some people do lock themselves into just being under one play style. Now, that's not to say that in your free time or when you're going to like a local that you don't have a deck that you prefer. And that's totally fine. Like, I'll play Plundered Patrol all day long, right? But I just understand that if I want to do really well in a format, that I might have to adapt to whatever the best deck is. So, like, if a control deck ends up being the best deck in the game, you better believe you're going to start seeing a lot of people start playing that control deck because it's just the best one, even if they're a combo player. And that's something that I think is really important to note. So just a suggestion as well that I think is also very important, and that is, if you do deem yourself to be a combo player, like strictly only combo, I heavily recommend that you do try out a mid-range deck, maybe even a control deck. Try out other decks that are not part of something that you're familiar with. This is important for 2 very good reasons. One, you'll start understanding the deck building and the decisions behind playing a deck like midrange or control, which is also very important when it comes to understanding how to beat those decks. Because if you know the types of floodgates and the types of interaction points that they like to go for, especially post-side, then you have a really good idea of what your siding patterns should look like into that matchup, and you have a better idea of how to counter their sideboard, because you know exactly what that deck typically sides. And that's going to be really important moving forward too, because there's so many different decks in the game that it's like really hard to choose one to just play. But sometimes it becomes a little bit more apparent in one format, and that could change in a month's time. I'm currently playing tier and I'm already looking for something else to play at the moment. And I think that's something that's really important to note. And that's not me saying that tier is bad. I think that's one thing where I'm like, well, I've been playing this deck now, and I think that maybe this other thing might be a little bit better at the moment. Let's go ahead and jump to this for a little bit, and then maybe we can go back to tier if it gets a little bit better. Me personally, I think there's certain decks that once it's like really known to be in the room, it becomes way worse to play, right? So you want to be able to switch to something that is going to be a little less prepared for, or just the best deck in the room outright, which I think is also very important. So if you did learn something today, definitely let me know down in the comments below. I think all these are really important when it comes to choosing a deck. There's a lot of different things to think about. If you have any questions down below, definitely go ahead and ask them. I'll respond to you. If you haven't already checked out the Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or the Metafy page, definitely go ahead and check it all out down in the description below. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. 20,000 subscribers, we made it. Let's go to 30,000 subscribers next. That's the next big goal, and I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much. I'll catch you on the next one. Later.